I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to episode 129 of Dark and Stormy Book Club. Today we have an interview from Sydney, Australia with Alex Gilly.
Alex Gilly is a writer and translator who was born in New York City and has lived in Australia, Canada, France, California, and the UK. Alex holds an MA in Translation and Interpreting Studies and a BA in Linguistics and Spanish and Latin American Studies, both from the University of New South Wales. He lives in Sydney with his wife and children. About Death Rattle. When Carmen Vega's boyfriend tries to kill her, she hands over all her savings to a smuggler and sets out from Tijuana in a small, leaky boat. Within sight of the California coast, the boat starts to sink and its passengers have to be rescued by Border Patrol. Soon, Carmen turns up dead in a privately operated migrant detention center. Neither Nick Finn, the officer who saved Carmen from drowning, or his wife, human rights lawyer Mona Jimenez, are satisfied with the prison's account of what happened to Carmen. Trouble is, the company that runs the prison is on the verge of signing a billion-dollar procurement contract with Homeland Security, and there are people in this world for whom $1 billion is worth a whole lot more than one human life, or even 3.
We would like to welcome Alex Gilly all the way from Sydney, Australia. He has written the very timely thriller, Death Rattle. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Your background is in the world of translating, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
That's your day job, so to speak.
It was one of my day jobs. I also worked as a journalist and magazine editor because translating is a bit piecemeal. You get a job and then you wait a while and then you get another job.
What drew you into that world?
Well, I always wanted to write, but I didn't think that a literature degree was all that practical. I was looking for something that was literature adjacent, that would suit me. And because I came from a bicultural background, I already had the mindset of a translator. Translating and interpreting has only been professionalized in the last 30 years or so. Before that, it used to just be children of immigrants interpreting from their parents. Now the universities offer degrees in it, which is what I did. It turned out to be a really good training ground for writers because it trains you to read very closely, not just the meaning of the content, but also sentence structure, syntax, and word choices. I think that really paid off in my writing. It made me slow down.
How does a nice translator get involved in the wicked world of crime fiction?
I was reading crime fiction as a teenager and never stopped. So I always knew that it was something that I wanted to write. It was always a long-term goal. And as time progressed, I just said, okay, I've got to do it now or never. So I started writing.
Did you ever translate a foreign language crime novel?
I haven't, actually. I would love to. I've translated some historical fiction. I've translated some true crime, but I haven't actually translated a detective novel, a thriller. I would love to, though. That would be something I would love to do. If anyone has a good untranslated French language crime novel, let me know.
We'll move on to your latest book, Death Rattle. I would categorize it as part thriller and part courtroom drama.
Yeah.
What inspired you to combine those two crime novel subgenres?
That is a great question. I think it came about because I wanted to write the book from two alternating points of view. One from the point of view of Nick Finn, who was the protagonist of my first novel. The other point of view from his wife, Mona Jimenez, who was his wife, obviously, in the first novel, but she didn't have a voice. As I wrote Death Rattle, without thinking about it, I ended up making most of the thriller scenes from Nick's point of view and most of the courtroom scenes and legal scenes from Mona's point of view. Subsequently, after the book was finished and was printed, I realized that this was a little bit gendered. The man is the action hero and Mona is cerebral and verbal. But I didn't think about that when I was writing it. It just sort of came out of me. So I guess it was a sensibility that I had then that I'm not sure if I would repeat it that way. I definitely imagined Mona as the intellectual of the pair. The courtroom was her domain, and I wanted to make sure that it's clear to the reader that she was very clever in the courtroom.
It did come across, I think.
After reading the book, we were convinced that you had a background in law because your courtroom scenes were so very convincing. What did you have to do to prepare for those scenes?
Well, I have no background in law. What happened was the first draft, the courtroom scenes felt to me a little hackneyed. They felt like courtroom scenes written by someone who had read courtroom scenes in other books and watched courtroom scenes on TV, and it didn't have a ring of authenticity. I launched into a deep dive of research. I started out by reading up a lot on asylum cases in California, people applying for asylum in the United States. I read up on some legislation on asylum. I read up on the federal rules of criminal procedure. I have to say, all of this is available online, so I didn't even really have to leave my office. I also read some reports by the ACLU, especially one they wrote on private prisons, which I found really helpful. I also had a friend here in Sydney. He was ill and he was having some treatments. And in between treatments, he would go and sit in the public gallery at the criminal court down in Sydney. And then we would have lunch and he would tell me about what had happened. And the Australian system's a little different from the US system, but it was really interesting to hear what he had to say. And I made a few notes from those lunches as well, which were helpful, just for the color and feel of what it's like in a criminal court case.
Do you do the whole wigs and robes like they do in Britain?
They used to. They no longer have to wear the wigs. I think they still wear the robes, but the wigs are no longer required because the wigs are made of horsehair.
Itchy.
They were itchy. And not only that, but the longer you're a barrister, the older your wig gets. It was sort of a mark of seniority to have old, revolting horsehair wigs that were just yellowing. And wig, it meant that you were very senior. The wig was young and it was new and fresh.
In the U.S. especially, Border Patrol is a very hot button issue. As we talked a little bit about Nick Finn and his wife, Mona, Nick is very capable, compassionate. Mona is immigrant rights attorney. So you've got kind of opposing forces there. What kind of response have you gotten to your series, just out of curiosity?
I have to say I've had overwhelmingly positive response, both from readers who sent me emails directly or from some of the reviews that they've posted online on things like Goodreads, which I'm really gratified about. I know it's a hot button issue in the US, but it's a hot button issue in a lot of countries nowadays, I think. In Australia as well, it's a real political football. I know I used to live in the UK and it's an issue there, French background, and it's definitely an issue there. And I think that it's an issue that needs to be handled delicately with some sensitivity. I put some time and effort into doing that. What I've heard from readers, they appreciated it.
May I ask what drew you to write about the American system of immigration versus our Australian method?
It's a good question. When I was 18, I went to college in Los Angeles. I was young, I was 18, and we used to go on vacations during the breaks down to Mexico. I was discovering both countries, really. I was discovering the United States and I was discovering Mexico. I was at a very impressionable age. It never left me. I always felt that there was a rich, fertile ground in my imagination. I think when I set out to write a crime novel, I'd been reading a lot of American crime and I sort of had my eye on the United States and I thought I should try to find a beat or an angle that is my own. A lot of the writers I had been reading had their own sort of beat. Michael Connelly was in Los Angeles and James Lee Burke in Louisiana. And I thought, what could I do? And I remembered the border and I thought maybe I could do something that involves the ocean. And so I did some research and I found out about the Marine Interdiction Unit of Customs and Border Protection. And I actually rang them up and interviewed a couple of Marine interdiction agents for Devil's Harbor, which was really interesting and sort of formed the basis of a lot of the action scenes in both books. And the other thing that's probably very different from the Australian system to the US system is the countries are adjacent in the US, whereas in Australia it's an island. So the politics of migration is around boat people, really, people who come in boats across the ocean, which is not quite the same as having a country right there next to you. if you see what I mean.
Even though this is a fictional story, it could have been ripped right out of the headlines over here. Was there an underlying message you wanted to leave with the reader?
No, is the short answer. My main goal as a crime writer is to keep readers hooked. But I will say it's a bonus if I can address some of the important issues along the way without banging the drum too hard. I do feel strongly that border policy in Australia and in the United States and in many other countries are inhumane and cruel. We need to rethink. We need to think more globally, not just as nation states. Have you seen the film The Third Man, an old film by Carol?
Oh,
Vega?
yes.
What's great about The Third Man is it's a crime thriller, but it also tells you something about profiteering in the post-war Vienna, the cruelty of the carpetbaggers who came into the ruins of World War II. It gives you a bigger message, but at heart, it's a crime thriller. Graham Greene, who wrote the screenplay, would distinguish between what he called his entertainments, which we would call popular fiction, and his serious novels. He wrote the screenplay for The Third Man. But I think it's a brilliant piece of writing and a brilliant piece of filmmaking that both keeps you hooked and also addresses some more profound issues. Not that I'm saying that my books are anything like what Graham Greene wrote. I do think it's a good model to look at.
I'll tell you, once you pick up this book and start reading, you're not going to put it down. You have to know what's coming next. It's one of those books.
Oh, it hit the ground running, that's for sure.
Yes, it did.
Thank you, Kathy. And that means I did my job, so I'm very pleased.
One of the biggest aspects of the novel revolves around snakes and snake bites.
Yes.
And the actual camps for illegal aliens in the States are in desolate areas. Is there an actual danger from snake bites in these regions?
I looked for but did not find any accounts of actual cases. But I will say that if there are camps, that means that there is food. And if there is food, there are rodents. And if there are rodents, there are snakes. Either the stories aren't coming out, or I would be surprised if there's no human-snake encounters in these remote camps in snake country.
I was just going to say it stands to reason. I like your logic.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to walk around with no shoes on, that's for sure.
And I set it up so that Carmen is, in the first scene we meet her, she's wearing sliders type of flip-flops. Anyway, I don't want to give away too much to your readers, but a few weeks ago, I read an account in the newspaper here in Australia of a guy in Queensland estate. There's a lot of snakes in Queensland. He was driving along the highway and a brown snake slithered around his leg, and brown snake is a lethal snake. I don't want to spoil anything for your listeners, but I had to pause because it was uncannily like a crucial scene in Death Rattle. I read up on the story and they didn't explain how the snake got into his cabin, so he must have left the window open or something. He had quite a shock.
I'll bet.
I have a brother who lives in New Zealand. He had to go to Sydney for surgery, and he said, nothing kills you in New Zealand. And in Australia, everything can kill you.
Yes, true.
He was glad to get back to New Zealand where he felt safer. I found this book very compelling from a lot of different angles. Do you know how difficult it is for these inmates that are in these incarceration centers to get legal representation?
I don't really. I'm not really qualified enough to answer that. I do know that there are many brilliant people who are volunteering their time and skills to helping these undocumented migrants. I have unbound admiration for these people who work for not-for-profits and make the effort to do it. Just like I have admiration for the people who try to bring the humanity and counter the cruelty of the system, people who plant water along the border so that people don't die of dehydration, and people who volunteer their time to offer legal representation to migrants, because it's easy to forget about these people. It really is. We've all got difficult lives now with COVID and everything that's going on in the world. It's not the right attitude, I feel.
Definitely.
Speaking of the attitude of the judge in your story is very difficult to think about. It's disturbing.
Yeah.
Have you found that this is the way the system actually operates?
Judge Ross is largely based on a book I read, a nonfiction book, a book of journalism, about a case of judicial corruption that took place in Pennsylvania. I don't want to ruin it for your readers. That case in Pennsylvania was quite harrowing to read about. The journalist who wrote the book reproduced many of the courtroom scenes verbatim. I drew a lot from those scenes, particularly the way that the judge addressed the people that he was sending to jail. So yes, it does actually happen.
He was maddening. Are you working on any new books that you can